It's been 20 years since Porsche unleashed the Cayenne upon us. 2 decades since a dyed-in-the-wool sports car maker embraced the winds of change and said, you know what, we're fed up with 911s. We are going to make a sports utility vehicle and you lot are going to absolutely love it.
Initially, people hated the idea, but it quickly became an enormous success, selling by the bucket load. And now, Porsche aims to continue that success with a new model for 2024.
And here it is, the brand new Cayenne. It comes with a new design, new interior, new engines, and new technology. But is it any good? Well, of course it is. It's a Porsche. Porsche don't really miss these days. But is it worth upgrading over the previous car? And should you be upset if, like some of my friends, you just bought the previous version because you didn't know this one was coming out? Yeah, you probably should be. Welcome everyone to a very wet, windy, blustery Northumberland in the northeast of England, where it seems I've driven into a bit of a storm. Unless this is what it's like all the time. I get the feeling it's the latter, with some very sideways rain, but we're going to make the most of it.
The new Cayenne has a bit of a storm of its own brewing under that bonnet. There are a bunch of new engine options, including the entry-level Cayenne and Cayenne S petrols, as well as 3 plug-in hybrids.
The one I'm driving today is the Porsche Cayenne E Hybrid, which uses a 3-litre V6, which makes 304 horsepower. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's not alone, it's got a buddy. It also uses a 176 horsepower electric motor connected to a 25.9 kilowatt-hour battery pack. Those two work together to produce a quite impressive 470 horsepower and 650 newton meters of torque. This car will do 0 to 62 in 4.9 seconds and 155 miles an hour flat out. And that means it's quicker than a Porsche Cayman. If you're in a Cayman and see one of these, don't bother, you're gonna lose.
As for the design changes, the new Cayenne now resembles its smaller, more nimble little brother, the Macan, thanks to a new front end and new and improved HD matrix headlights offering 32,000 pixels per lamp. Apparently, it's so precise it will even light up a specific lane in the dark without blinding other cars. The profile is largely the same, except with new wheel designs and tyres with lower pressure for a more comfortable ride, while at the back, the only real change seems to have been to drop the number plate to a lower position. Thankfully, more upgrades can be found in the cabin.
First of all, the dashboard has been almost completely redesigned. It's now much wider and more upright than the previous car, and that gives you the sense that you've got a lot more space inside the vehicles. You've also got a lot of new displays inside this car, including a curved screen in front of the driver, which is reminiscent of the one that you get in the Porsche Taycan. You can, of course, customize this completely. It's all digital. Next to it is your central infotainment display, 12-inch. It's going to be very familiar to anyone who's ever driven a Porsche, nice and easy to use. They've also updated Apple CarPlay to allow you to control vehicle-specific functions that you don't normally get to control from outside of CarPlay, including the radio and the ambient lighting inside the car. The center console has also been updated. One thing they've done is they've moved the drive selector from the middle to up here on the dashboard, and that frees up a tiny bit of space for a key or some loose change, for example. They've also given you some physical control buttons for your climate control, although they're not entirely physical. They're kind of a hybrid in the sense that the main controls are capacitive, but when you press them, the entire panel goes down to give you a little bit of reaction from your fingers. Another thing I really like is the wireless charging system in this car. If you put your fingers into the wireless charging slot, you'll feel it's very cold. And the reason for that is that if, like me, you do wireless charging quite a lot, your phone can get very hot and Apple CarPlay can start glitching out. But by keeping it cool, you keep it much more reliable and stable for longer. And the other benefit is that it can keep your chocolates from melting. That's great engineering.
As for the back of the new Cayenne, nothing much has changed there either. It's still very spacious, but bear in mind that if you get the coupe, as seen here, it comes with 2 rear seats as standard. You'll have to tell Porsche if you want to swap this weird bread loaf holder thing for a usable middle seat, although that's a no-cost option. The boot, meanwhile, is still as big as ever at 772 litres despite the addition of plug-in hybrid components with batteries, although underfloor storage is barely big enough for your charging cables.
Normally I like to start my reviews of SUVs in particular by telling you what they feel like from behind the driver's seat, how comfortable they are, etc. But because the Cayenne is kind of like a driver's SUV, let's talk about how it drives a little bit. Okay, so it is very wet out there today, so I'm not going to throw it into corners too aggressively, but I will tell you that the grip levels that I've experienced so far are very, very confidence inspiring. The poise and composure through the corners is really impressive as well. The body control is lovely. It just kind of settles into this subtle lean, and actually you can feel the back end start to step out just a tiny bit. Not enough to terrify you, but just enough to remind you that you're in a car that is designed to appeal to the driver. And that's a big difference to some of its rivals like the Mercedes GLE or BMW X5, which are geared more towards comfort than driver involvement. This is an SUV, a family car, that you can get in and actually enjoy driving it. The car is quite tall, and in these windy conditions you can actually feel the wind blowing it to the left-hand side, so I've got to keep a pretty firm grip on the steering wheel, but there's actually a good sense of feel and feedback coming through that wheel. I've got to give a good shout out to this gearbox as well. When you upshift, you can actually feel a torque interruption, and that means that you feel the gears bang into place, and that makes it feel that little bit more involving. The brakes are quite consistent as well, which isn't always the case on a plug-in hybrid, as you get that overlap between regenerative braking and physical braking, and it even makes quite a decent noise as well. This is quite a fun car to drive. The good news is that while it's sporty, it doesn't feel uncomfortable. All versions of the Cayenne come with adaptive dampers as standard, and there's a fancy new suspension system that uses a 2-valve system to give the car better control over compression and rebound. The other thing working in your favor when it comes to comfort are the new tires on this car. The previous generation came with more low profile tires that had to be inflated with a greater pressure. However, on this car, you've got 45 section up front and 40 section on the rear, which are filled with a lower pressure, and that allows them to act more like pillows to help soak up the bumps in the road. It's not a Rolls Royce, but it is a surprisingly comfortable car given how sporty it is in the Benz.
Another big difference between this and the previous Cayenne is the updated plug-in hybrid technology. The new car comes with a bigger battery, jumping from 17.9 kilowatt hours to 25.9.
The simple upshot of that is that you now get a lot more battery range. Porsche reckon you can get up to 55 miles just running on electric power alone, and it will run up to 84 miles an hour in EV mode. EV mode itself feels fantastic too. It's very smooth and it feels pretty much exactly like you'd expect a fully electric car to feel. On some plug-in hybrids, you kind of have to drive very gently to stop the internal combustion engine from kicking in, but in this, you treat it pretty much like a normal electric car. Unfortunately, the range, at least in my hands, wasn't as good as advertised. In my hands, it managed 30 miles, although when you consider the fact that most people's commute is only around 20 miles a day, 30 miles is plenty to go about your business. And when you get home again, you can plug it in and charge the thing up. When you've run out of battery, you can knock the thing into hybrid mode and it will drive using a mixture of the dregs left in the battery and using the V6. But what is that like? Is it economical to drive? Well, the simple answer is it's not quite as good as you might think. I have been driving for the last 3 hours, 20 minutes in hybrid mode with the battery flat, and I can tell you I've been averaging 14.7 miles per gallon, which is not that impressive. Admittedly, I have been pressing on, but in the times when I've been a little bit more mindful of how to drive economically, the most I managed was 25 miles per gallon. So even though it's a plug-in hybrid, once that battery goes, so does your economy.
Despite having electrical bits, the new Cayenne is even a competent towing car. Porsche says it will happily pull 3,500 kilos braked or 750 kilos unbraked. They also say that despite it being such a good performer on the road, that it won't shy away from rougher terrain.
I'm very pleased to report that the Cayenne does indeed do pretty well off the beaten track. here I am on, well, it's a rally stage, isn't it? And it's coping fairly well. I did think about coming somewhere a little bit more demanding, but let's face it, this is about the extent of what most Porsche owners will put their Cayenne through if they're feeling adventurous, or perhaps if they feel like they want to take a shortcut on the school run. Yes, I know what you're thinking, your Ford Fiesta can do this, and you're absolutely right, but one thing your Ford Fiesta can't do is tackle this kind of terrain in this much style and comfort. It does feel really, really luxurious, even though you're pounding along in this kind of environment along rough surfaces. As well as your normal driving modes, you've also got an off-road mode, and then within that, you've got different terrain options. You've got gravel, mud, sand, and rocks. And what that does is it basically sets the car up to most adequately cope with the different types of road surfaces that you might encounter. You've also got Off-Road 1 and Off-Road 2. In Off-Road 1, it raises that suspension by 15 millimeters, and in Off-Road 2 by 45 millimeters, which is handy for whenever you're crawling over rocks, for example. Right, what's it like if you're in a bit of a tighter spot? How's the turning circle? Well, the car does actually have rear wheel steering, but what I've noticed is that it doesn't actually turn the rear wheels in the opposite directions to the front wheels when you're stationary. So if you've pulled up somewhere and you expect those rear wheels to turn in the opposite direction to help you out, they're not moving. The car might as well not have rear wheel steering. And as you can see, I am making a complete meal out of this 19-point turn. Is it as hardcore as, say, a Range Rover? Well, no, but let's face it, the Cayenne was never designed for that sort of thing. Actually quite good fun out here, and I'm not concerned about damaging the car because, let's face it, it is quite capable, even on the rough stuff. Right, let's get out of here. How do you sum up a car like the brand new Cayenne? Well, on the whole, I think it's a brilliant piece of kit. It's fantastic to drive. I think that's its major selling point. It's a lot more enjoyable to thread through a set of corners than the likes of a BMW X5 or a Mercedes GLE. It's on a par, I would say, with an SQ8 for like handling dynamics, but ultimately, I think it's a more compelling package than any of those cars because it blends that dynamic ability with modern technology and also stonking performance. It's also got that enormous battery pack, which means that in electric only mode, you're gonna have a car that's really cheap to run and really, really economical as long as you've got some battery charge. The improvements they've made with the technology really make it stand out as well. It is a pretty good package. If you're looking for a family SUV that's practical, great tech, good fun to drive, yeah, take a look at this. Now, get me somewhere dry.